count me down? Guys, what's up? It's Jerry Miller. It's good to be with you on a Monday. We certainly hope the weekend treated you well. A lot we're going to cover on the I Love CVille show. Heather Hill, our guest, Councilor extraordinaire from Charlottesville, Virginia. She will join us in a matter of moments. Before we get to Heather Hill, I'd like to thank some of our sponsors of this fantastic program. Did you guys know that Greenberry's Coffee and Sean and Roxanne Simmons, the husband and wife team behind Greenberry's Coffee, launched this business in Charlottesville more than 27 years ago? That's right. Now they have over 30 locations worldwide, including Japan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. They're about to open in Portland, Oregon. It's an entrepreneurial story that I love to cover on the I Love CVille show because it showcases the best of Charlottesville, Virginia. I also want to thank Dr. Scott Wagner of Scott Wagner Chiropractic and Sports Medicine. The Who's Got Your Back tagline, one of our favorites here at I Love CVille. Dr. Wagner, we salute you. On that note, Judah Wickhauer behind the board, we'll go to our two-shot and we'll welcome Heather Hill to the program. Heather, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
A pleasure. I've looking forward to this for a number of times, a number of days, a number of weeks. We booked this in 2008, and you're a lady that's true to your word. You showed up here early and excited for this program. Let's start open-ended.
Sure.
Who is Heather Hill, the person, the counselor, the wife, the mom? Who is Heather Hill?
Oh, well, that is an open-ended question. Well, for those who don't know, I grew up in northern New York State, so pretty close to the Canadian border, and I was raised, my mom was an elementary school teacher, and my dad worked in municipal government, and I ended up in Virginia at first because I went to Virginia Tech, and that's where I studied engineering, and was there throughout my whole time there, and also then co-opted during that time. So I graduated in 2000 from Virginia Tech and was in Raleigh for a short period of time, but when I moved to Charlottesville, it was around 2003, and worked there locally for a couple of years, and then ended up at the Darden School of Business, where I got my master's in business, and then spent some time in brand management after that. Was in Minneapolis, Minnesota for 2 years. My now husband stayed here the whole time, but I was really anxious to kind of work. I was at General Mills and really kind of go to a brand central place to kind of complement my past experience with operations, but came back to Charlottesville shortly thereafter. We got married and have since had 3 kids. So we got married in 2009, and we have a daughter who is 8, a son just turning 7 this week, and then our youngest is 3. And so when I think about kind of transitioning who I am as a person to the role that I'm filling for the city, I think about, whenever I moved anywhere, so obviously grew up in northern New York State, really tight with my family. I'm one of 3 girls. Going to Virginia Tech was a huge leap for me. 10 hours down I-81 was a long stretch, and it was anxiety provoking just to kind of make that big leap, having always grown up in the same home with that same obviously family unit there, and then like venturing off into college when a lot of my peers were staying within the state of New York, and there were certainly a handful that went beyond, but that was a big leap for me. But I found that when I got there, just really establishing myself outside of just the classroom environment and getting involved in other ways, part of that community, was where I got a lot of my energy from and a lot of the positive things that came. And as I kind of progressed through my adult life, I found that anytime I've moved, and I moved many times before really settling here, that's been kind of how I've made those houses a home. It's just really kind of establishing myself in those other extracurricular things. And the same was true when I was at Tech, as when I was at Darden, as well as the different times that I was in different places. And ultimately, when we came here and we knew that for sure that when I moved back that second time and that Charlottesville was going to be home forever, we raise our children, I really wanted to get involved at that point. And there was a number of different boards I looked at getting involved in. I got involved with the Shelter for Help in Emergency when they were starting their design house. So I was the marketing chair for that initiative for their first 2 years. Really opened my eyes to so many other needs in our community and where I could fit in. And also within my neighborhood association. I'm from the north downtown part of the city, and I was on that board pretty soon after we decided to live in that part of the city, and ultimately led that board before really kind of deciding that I wanted to run for council. And that was precipitated just by what I was observing both throughout the community and some of the needs that we had, as well as what I saw through that lens of the neighborhood leadership, and realizing that my background, I'm a very process-driven person, was something that I felt like I could bring a benefit to. And a little anecdote, I actually went to the city at one point, kind of just seeing some hurdles that we were having within our neighborhood development services, and feeling like I had a skill set that could kind of contribute to that. And then when I went to approach some staff about like, how can I get involved, I was taking notes, and the staff person looked at me, she's like, are you taking this to the media? And I'm like, no, I legitimately just want to learn and try to help, like literally as a volunteer resource. And I realized pretty quickly that it is tough to do that unless you go in another direction. And then that was a real precipitous for me to then decided, you know what, I think I need to find another path into making change in this community, because I do feel like we have a lot of strong staff and we need to be leveraging that staff. I also feel like we need to make some changes within the city of Charlottesville. And so at that point, I talked to my husband about it and decided that this was a window in time with my children. And at the time, my daughter, my youngest, was just over a year. And so, pretty young, but at the same time, not reading the Daily Progress every morning or watching local news. And so saw it as a window. And for me, just a real ripe opportunity to make meaningful change in the community. And because as I said, I did a lot of independent consulting work when I came back to Charlottesville, but it was those opportunities that I had to really work with people in the community that were the most energizing to me. And so it was kind of just seeing like where I really cared about leveraging my professional experience, but in a way that was really going to help the community. I was not the person for several years. I was just on a phone largely working for other companies and supporting them, but not around people. And I'm certainly a people person. And honestly, the moment I started knocking on doors, I just realized like this is something that I'm really even more passionate about than I even gave myself, that credit for. And I've just enjoyed that journey. I would say the campaign process for me was still one of the most energizing experiences, just going out and traversing through every street in this community and just really getting to know it and through such a different lens. And asking people, frankly, that's what I did. Like, what are your priorities? Like, what do you want to see? Because my goal is to then take, the skills that I can bring to this table and not a bunch of personal, agendas or objectives, but how do then I translate and help leverage my skills to kind of address the needs that we have in this community. And so that's kind of where I came to be here.
That was a great first answer right there. And I think we need to turn that, Judah, into a sizzle reel right there. Who Heather Hill is as a counselor, as a professional, as a woman, as a family person. You're crushing it. I think something that really stood out to me with how you won your election is you had your boots on the streets. You were going door to door, you were knocking, you were doing the face-to-face game. I was impressed by that. I think every neighborhood, not everyone, but a lot of the neighborhoods you hit in Charlottesville.
I did walk every street, I did.
You got face-to-face with so many people here. I mean, put that in perspective.
Well, it's just interesting because when I thought about taking this on, for me to really inform myself and to be the best leader if it was to come to a positive outcome at the end and I was elected, I felt like it was just so important to hear directly from the community and also for them to meet me and to hear from me and just to have that chance to have that one-on-one interaction. And you're a brand person. For me, I was like, I am my own brand, and I am really the best person to do that. And if it's disappointing to someone, at least I know that I'm the one that's disappointing them. And so I had shirts made that were super bright yellow, and it said, "I am Heather Hill." So I wasn't trying to deny who I am. I'm running around with this, and had a pair of sneakers, and I literally hit it every day from the moment that I launched. Like a few days, my husband and I went away for just one weekend after I launched just to kind of regroup. And then every day I went out and set a goal for myself. That's the process-driven person in me. But just went out, and it was really about posing that question of, this is who I am in brief, but really it's about you. And you tell me, citizen, what is it that matters to you? And it was amazing. So I developed, I don't know if you ever looked at it, but a map. And by precinct, I looked at what were the top 5. You can still, it's hillforcville.com is still live. I still have it out there as just a reference point. But what are the top 5 priorities I was hearing from the different voting precincts? Because it really allowed me to see that there is a lot of things as a community that we are aligned on, and there's some things that we have different. But it really kind of helped paint a picture, but it also was just a way for me then to share what I've learned with the broader community as we went into the general election cycle. And I was just so energized. And there are some days where, you just kind of feel like you're down and you're tired. And I would just make these amazing connections with people who I would argue I have nothing in common with, except for just that we have to remember is we're all human beings in this, and that we want to prioritize our families and education and those things we do have in common, despite the fact that on the outside we may look like we're very different. And those connections that I made with some folks that I still keep in touch with, and honestly, when I have a bad day, just like to go back to, are not people I would have known before. And I just felt so energized through that process. And I will say, and I think I shared with this before we got on, that it reminded me that when I go into that council chamber, because I was at every council meeting for the year leading up to when I actually started, so the whole year before I became in office, I was at every meeting, maybe with the exception to one. And it's hard because you get into that room sometimes and you feel like this is how everyone feels. But I had really used that opportunity in between meetings every night. I'm out there meeting with the community. And it was just a great reminder of I'm here to serve this broader community, not necessarily just those that are in that chamber. And that's something I think I could say I missed today. I thought I had a goal of having the capacity to do not door knocking for me to be for anything other than just to kind of be more in touch again with the community. And I just wish there was more time in the day because I really do miss that element of the campaigning. Obviously, we reach out to people, and I probably have coffees with people like, at least a dozen constituents a week that I meet with.
Wow.
But I think that just the sheer volume is only so much capacity to have. But I think that is just such an important thing for all of us. We need to have our boots out there on the ground and really be connecting with the people of the community. And I hope I have the opportunity to continue to do that in the next 3 years.
Well, that was another great answer, and you're getting props right now on the stream. David says you're the best counselor in the city. We want to thank Josh Carson, Caitlin, Michelle Lewis, Constance Wyatt, Patricia Bowden, Carlo Mendoza, Michael Allenby, Josephine Humphrey. So many people watching on the feed right now.
Well, I appreciate them being interested.
You're doing a great job. I think when you ran for city council, it was such an interesting time for Charlottesville. I guess I'll start with that. Put it in perspective. When you're running for council, it is at probably the most tumultuous time in Charlottesville history.
Yes, and honestly, when I made the decision to run, it was preceding that. My final decision was after the election in 2016. I was pretty much there, but I said the next morning when I woke up, I think a lot of us were a little bit shell-shocked. What am I going to do? Am I going to embrace this opportunity and just jump in feet first and try to show a different direction that we can take local politics, especially because I think it's where you can have the biggest change? Or am I going to run from this? And I really felt important to jump in. But at that point in time, I think what you're referring to, that transition was only just beginning to happen in terms of just the shift in our community and some of the issues that were coming to the forefront. And I remember very vividly in February when some of those important votes were being taken on things, and you could certainly see that energy. And again, for me, is why I want to reinforce, that was why it was so important to get out into the community and just to get that pulse of the people and just to understand how that differed maybe from what we're seeing more in the controlled environment where the meetings are taking place. And not to say that what we hear in those environments is certainly important, but to not make sure that we're not ignoring all the other voices that may not be at the table and understanding why aren't they at the table. And so during that time, there was a lot of transition, and there was certainly a very uncomfortable council meetings as people get to know that you're running, and some of them have opinions of you. Whether they're founded or not, it's a struggle. And I certainly remember cameras being placed on me, personal cameras during those meetings, and people putting you in the forefront. And I'll be honest, I've never been one that considered myself having a thick skin. And I feel like that has been something that's been a challenge for me even as I've looked into this. And I'll say it wasn't until this last summer that I feel like I've kind of grew an armor where I just realized that I have to kind of just take some things at face value and just recognize and be true to who I am as a human being and my values, and hope that just is reflective and that can garner the support of this community. And if it doesn't, then that's people's decisions to make. But that's just kind of how I have to live with all the decisions and the votes that I take, and that's just kind of how I take it one day at a time. I do try to feel like I've been true to who I am as a person, and both on the personal side and the professional side. But the course of that year was like nothing I've ever experienced. It was certainly a roller coaster ride, and obviously there was a primary that took place where there was an incumbent involved, and I was pretty new to any of this. And then after that point in time, it was a very different atmosphere in terms of how normally we go from a Democratic primary to a general election. So in a sense, it was really two separate elections.
Well, a lot of ways, the primary in Charlottesville determines whether or not you're going to win council or not.
Well, given that we're a highly Democratic community, but more and more people are deciding maybe they don't want to be tied to a party. And
Mayor Walker's a good example.
Sure, and I would agree. I'm not really quite sure why we feel at the local level why we have to have a party system, but it does exist, and that was a direction that I certainly did take, and it really gave me a good opportunity to have a really long runway for the election cycle. But it didn't come without its challenges. And obviously to be on, I would say what was a benefit, though, is to be on the side that wasn't up on the dais during that summer and then those months that followed. It just really gave me a unique perspective of being among the people and those anger and that concern. And I think that really has kind of helped me to gain a very different lens than I ever would have had otherwise, especially if I had already been in those positions like some of my colleagues have been.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think you on council so far, I think you've done a great job. I think a lot of people would also agree with that. I've been impressed with you. I have a lot of questions that I want to get to. Let me throw this to you. When you were knocking on doors in the city and you were checking all these precincts, all these neighborhoods, getting a feel for what Charlottesville was about, what are some of the things that you learned that maybe is not in the news? Because I feel like so much that we see in the Daily Progress or on NBC 29, we see folks coming to city council meetings and being very vocal and yelling and being very passionate. I think we both know, and you've already indicated this, that is not necessarily a reflection of the city of Charlottesville as a whole. So what I'm trying to get at is, what are some topics that you learned from that door-to-door knocking that are not in the news cycle or prevalent that we should know about?
Well, what's amazing to me is just foundationally so much we have in common in terms of just, we all certainly want to prioritize our families, and with that comes the importance of our education. I heard a lot around just how do we support our youth. Obviously, our youth are in schools a certain part of the day, but there's a lot of other hours of the day. What can we do as a community to kind of get behind our youngest of people who are going to grow in this community and eventually lead this community? You know, hearing those concerns from residents throughout the community around how do we support our youngest of citizens. And we can't deny, and that's why it's been certainly a priorities of mine and my colleagues, but housing is important. And it's important in that people want to be able to stay in the homes that they've been in their whole lives, or there are people who are of later years where their now incomes have become, flat, and they are retired, and they want to be able to be in the neighborhoods that they've kind of grown their own children in as other maybe younger families are coming in. And we also want to be in a situation where we're not doing development that then is rising the property values for some of those folks who do want to stay where they are.
They can't afford the tax assessments.
Correct. And so it's all really a balance, but the bottom line is people want to be here, which I think is a very positive thing. Totally. It makes it very competitive, and there's a balance we need to strike about how do we ensure, because I certainly do not want us to be in a position where we're finding ourselves forcing people out because property values or our tax rates are high, and people, I can see the value of increasing taxes, but at the same time, so many people in our renting, and they're never going to benefit from any kind of incentive programs that we're going to have from a tax perspective. So how do we look at this holistically to ensure that we are maintaining the diversity that we really want in this community? And I think it's a commitment that all of us share, but really just hearing that from the community going around, and how much people just really wanted to continue to be living in the city. And it's a challenge. If we look at our staff and even our first responders, how few of them can actually afford to live here, that prevents its own challenges, and including our teachers as well. And so those are definitely themes that kind of came up, but at the same time, I just feel like this is a community that really cares about the place where they live, and I think that that's so positive, and I really want to encourage us to kind of find those common grounds and come together as a community, and emphasize those many positive things that I do believe we have, and certainly recognizing that we need to deal with so many issues that we're facing.
Well said. And you talk about the first responders. I think that's a natural springboard into some of the content that I've read in the Daily Progress. I'm a news junkie. I read the newspapers, the TV outlets, radio outlets nonstop. I just can't get enough of it. One of the stories that I've been following closely was the Charlottesville Police Department and the attrition it's experiencing. We're losing Charlottesville police officers at a rapid rate, whether it's they cannot afford to live in Charlottesville, Heather, maybe it's that they don't feel that the community embraces them like they should. I mean, these folks are putting their lives on the line to protect us. They should be our heroes. They should not be seen as afterthoughts. I'm going to start open-ended with you. Your thoughts on the fact that we are losing so many of our policemen, policewomen in the Charlottesville police force.
And I think some of them have been shared pretty publicly, and that obviously there is certainly, first and foremost, there is a wage disparity. And so when you couple that with some of the other issues that have been raised, it can become a big concern, and it can result in that. And we have to recognize we're competing with other jurisdictions. We're competing with Albemarle County as well as the surrounding counties, and especially, as you mentioned, if those officers aren't even living in our city already, right. For them to go to another jurisdiction where maybe it's even a shorter commute for them, is compelling. And so we have to kind of look and see, well, where are those disparities, and what is going to be the best holistic way of achieving that? Because obviously we also have other first responder categories that fall into that, and how do we address the needs of all of those? But that's first and foremost a clear concern. It's we already have this gap, and then when you elevate that gap with what is perceived, and I would say is a reality of some of the communities, the culture that we have among our broader community relative to law enforcement, that makes it really difficult. And I think I'm not going to deny there always are going to be people within any organization that are not going to have the best interests of their community at heart. I just think that that's true anywhere you go when I use the community loosely. I mean, any corporate environment or any public environment. But the vast majority of people who are giving themselves in this way are wonderful human beings who have families just like you and I do, that they're going home to it, and that they're trying to put a meal on the table.
I can't even imagine if my wife, and I love my wife and my son more than anything in life, if my wife is leaving home for a graveyard shift or just a regular, not daytime shift, to go protect the city and put her life on the line to protect community members as a policewoman, and then her not getting the respect and the treatment that she deserves, I mean, that's just wrong. And you've hit on so much that I want to cover here, because if Louisa or Orange or if Green or if Albemarle, if Waynesboro, if they're offering these folks more money for this position and then giving them the take-home cars, and maybe it's in a community that doesn't have as much turmoil or as much headlines in the news like Charlottesville does, why would they go back to CPD? Why would they stay here? And I think it's a legitimate question. Sheriff Harding recently said on TV that we need to have a third party come in and see what's going on here. And I don't agree with that.
I'm glad you bring that up, because I don't agree with that either.
Yeah.
And I will say that the churn last week, the biggest thing that was disappointing to me, and I think our interim city manager addressed it as well, is that I don't understand in a community that I think we've all been trying to talk about partnering together and leveraging each other's resources. Because to me, as much as I am a city councilor, that dotted line around the city of Charlottesville is imaginary. I mean, it's not real. And we need to be working as one community and one region. And these issues are not just ours alone. And housing is one that I feel like the city is really taking a huge step in trying to address the housing concerns. But we only have so much square footage. But back to the point, I really struggle with someone being that critical and taking the media as the route to really address that, when I think that we should be having these conversations. I'm not going to try to deny that there are maybe more issues at hand than what is right now being presented. I just don't know. But I think that it's important, and I really feel confident that we have the right folks in place that can help us to provide an open door, so that we are hearing both from our law enforcement community and our broader community about what the issues are and what are those barriers to maintaining those officers, because there are many. And it's not to say it's without accountability, though, because we have a civilian review board, and right now we have a group that's putting together the bylaws, and the ultimate goal is that so that we can have that accountability, so that everyone in the community can feel comfortable that when there are missteps, that there is an independent group that can help assess that. But I believe that there needs to be more collaboration of that group with our law enforcement community as we look long term. There has to, and as much as they are going to be independent and have that accountability, there still has to be some relationship building that takes place there.
That was very well said. I think that's a highlight right there, JW. That was very well said. And I 1,000% agree with you. And I 1,000% agree with what you said about the dotted line. I mean, I look at Charlottesville and Albemarle as being one and the same. Albemarle is much stronger when Charlottesville's doing well. Charlottesville's much stronger when Albemarle County's doing well. And having a cohesive effort. When here's a perfect example. When Supervisor Randolph had an issue with Charlottesville and keeping its word from a parking standpoint with moving the courts downtown or keeping the courts downtown. He did not want to keep the courts downtown. I think everyone in Charlottesville, the lawyers, the judges, the attorneys, everybody, wanted the courts to stay right there. I do not understand why we were even considering moving the courts to the county, because we know that the court systems do not drive economic growth. People go to court, they get their charge, whatever it is, and then they leave. They're not staying for martini steaks and shopping expeditions. They're just not doing that. So where I'm going with this is, he made the comment, Supervisor Randolph, that he did not think that Charlottesville was going to be true to its word from a parking standpoint. And that right there was a microcosm for me of so much trouble with the county and the city.
No, I agree. And for me, as someone who's relatively new on this, the dotted line itself, I said already, just kind of perplexes me. And there's a lot of history in terms of why we're separate. And this is the first, this is a state where we have independent cities. So there is a separation. Where I grew up, it was kind of, you're all part of the county that you reside in. But I think we need to be putting more formal measures. And obviously we have a number of memorandums of understanding for how we can partner more. And the third leg of this is clearly the university. And so I have a lot of confidence that we recently have new leadership at the county. And obviously the Board of Supervisors goes through its changes just like we go through our changes. And I think with new perspectives brings new with new folks brings new perspectives. We have a new leader at the university, and I'm very encouraged with, I think, that the role that he sees that the university is going to play, and not just the university's properties, but across through the city and this region, and the impacts that they've had traditionally. I'm hopeful that...
I like him.
Yeah, I'm very encouraged.
Jim Ryan we're talking about.
Right, and I think he's certainly taken a number of steps to want to be proactive about engaging a broader group of voices to try to understand how can we address these concerns. And then we are in the process of also recruiting a new city manager. So here you look at this, all three groups are going to have new leadership over the course of just a couple of years. and then hopefully, being supported by their electeds in a way that we really can drive meaningful change regionally. Because back to the housing piece, we are 10.4 square miles, and we are certainly investing in it, but there's only so much that the city of Charlottesville is going to be able to endure in terms of the capacity that we have as a city, and we really have to partner with the county in that they have more of the land, and then even in that urban ring, a lot can be done there. And then third, though, with the university, because as they grow, their growth impacts our city and our capacity and our ability to really address these needs for our community members. One of the bigger issues that comes from the university is really around parking. Like if they don't provide adequate parking, it's really affecting the quality of life around the Fifeville neighborhood and all those 10th and Page, where those folks, anyone that doesn't have a permitted, slot, is getting inundated with people who are literally trespassing through private property just to get to work because we're not providing that. So I think we need to look at all of this systemically. But some of it, just comes with certain critical masses that allow us to have better transportation systems. So I'm sorry, I'm getting off.
No, that was great.
This is how my brain works. Like I'm very much a process person. And you see how these things are all a domino effect. So anytime anyone asks me about like priorities, I don't see anything in isolation. I think that one thing kind of has an effect on the other, and that's true for these jurisdictions as well. It's like we cannot operate independently or in silos. We have to collaborate, and I'm really encouraged that, with all, like I said, new leadership in all three helms over the course of this last couple of years, and we're looking forward to obviously that in ourselves. But we have leadership at this point in an interim. So I think kind of being able to put some of that, I call it baggage, some of that history and that baggage behind, I think is really important for us to all look forward.
Great clip right there, Judah. Let's turn that one into a sizzle reel, please. I mean, I agree with pretty much everything you've said so far. I'm worried about the Fifeville neighborhood. I'm worried about what's going to happen with, UVA continuing to expand and potentially swallowing neighborhoods. I want to get to that in a matter of seconds. Before we do get to that, what do you see as the future of Fifeville? What do you see happening down Cherry Avenue? How much of an impact is UVA going to have here? We know the Kibbs Market building is this close to being purchased, redeveloped. We're going to break that news later on the I Love CVille show, maybe next week. But what do you see with the future of this corridor?
Well, what I struggle with that corridor is that for years that neighborhood has been asking for more of a long-range plan on what that's going to look like. And in the meantime, a lot of things have been developed more piecemeal. And if you don't have something you're looking at a whole corridor holistically, then you're not going to have something at the end game that's really going to be delivering on the needs of the community. And so I do think we're at a point now where as a small player area plan is being developed, but what I thought was amazing about that neighborhood association is they had resources within their neighborhood association of citizens who had skill sets who could really kind of ignite that and offer themselves as resources. And in some cases, I think they hit the same wall that I did at times. It's like, I want to offer myself as a resource, but I'm kind of having trouble getting in. But ultimately they did, and they have that plan. But the problem is if we don't get that plan into implementation where we can actually have zoning that aligns with it, it doesn't do any good for any of us. And I think that's the concern we have now as we look at our comprehensive plan. We haven't done a zoning change since before our last update, and then before, and that was at a different time for our community. And we really need to be prioritizing how we not only get through this plan, but then how do we put the resources in place to actually rewrite the zoning so that we don't see neighborhoods getting engulfed and that we are having that transition point, because there certainly is going to have to be dense. We're looking at density in certain areas, and I think that we want to create these nodes. And then the Planning Commission earlier on in their efforts was looking at how do you create these nodes so people within a walking distance have access to green space, have access to the amenities such as that community store so that they can get their foods. And obviously we have our schools and all of those things within those node systems, and then we support those with transportation. So that kind of creates that whole systematic effect. But without those visions, and then not only the vision, but then the implementation so that people then can develop against those, you're going to, like you said, some of these great opportunities are going to be lost, and they'll be developed in ways that were maybe appropriate for 2001 and not necessarily for 2019.
And a perfect example of that is you take the Fifeville neighborhood, you take the Friendship Court neighborhood. Why is there not a grocery store that these neighborhoods can walk to where they can get good food? It's an underserved. Why is public transportation not emphasized even more in these neighborhoods? And I think you've hit a lot about there. I would like to throw to you, man, there's so much I want to throw to you. We got a lot of people giving you props here on the stream too, so you're doing a great job. One of the questions, I'll stick to the script here because we have a lot to get to. The comprehensive plan, what is it going to do to promote affordable housing? Here's the concerns I have. One thing we've talked about is I think it's 53% of property in the city of Charlottesville is zoned for a single family home. When so much of the property in Charlottesville is zoned for a single-family detached home, that is not going to offer affordable housing. That's not going to offer like the micro units that Oliver Kutner was trying to do for the studio apartments. Is that a starting point for Charlottesville, changing the zoning here?
I agree, and I think that's the direction that the Planning Commission has kind of put forward to us, and we only saw some draft versions in December, but I think there's a lot of energy around how do we loosen that in a way that people can have accessory dwelling units that can become affordable dwelling units, and what can we do as a city to incentivize that? Because the risk that you do run is if you do allow for that pretty much everywhere, is like, are they then going to translate into what you want it to be? Because let's be honest, like an Airbnb and the amount of money that someone can make on that over the course of a year with just a few peak time rentals over short periods of time could compete with what we would garner from an affordable unit over the course of the year. So as a city, we kind of have to have some ownership of that to ensure that if we're going to provide this zoning opportunity, that's not just going to turn into a bunch of Airbnbs, because that's not what we're trying to achieve here. So what can we do? And that is those are policy decisions that yet to be discussed, but those are the things that we need to be looking at, because why we have R1 zoning in that broad of a swath is not necessary. I think there's a lot of properties, especially some of those larger lots, that can accommodate an accessory dwelling unit that would provide that smaller footprint. And then there's some things we can do just to allow for more of the duplex and triplex in certain parts. But again, it's all through transitions. And I just think that there is certainly energy both from the Planning Commission as well as the City Council to really look that way. And we recognize that the R1 and how we treat R1, and it's not that we're just going to all of a sudden go gangbusters everywhere R1, but what can we do to kind of really spread that? That's the whole thing. We have to kind of share this throughout the community for this to have the greatest impact on our affordable housing crisis. And again, I think we need to share it with the county as well.
Is it fair to say it is an affordable housing crisis? I got a buddy who is a newly married, as a young child. He works in F&B. He's a bartender at a restaurant in town. And he said, Jerry, we went from my bachelor pad to now a home for my wife and my young child. And the most affordable thing I could find in town was $1,250, and it was a shack in the city of Charlottesville. Is it safe to say we do have an affordable housing crisis in Charlottesville?
I do think it's safe to say. And I I'll go back to when our teachers and our first responders and our own city staff can't afford to live here and are doing extensive commutes to come and serve this community. That's a problem.
Yeah, okay, well then let me play devil's advocate for the sake of the show. As homeowners ourselves, homes are in a lot of ways our most important investment in our portfolio. As homeowners ourselves, are we not, don't we want to see the value of our properties increase? Don't we want to be able to say, all right, the folks that are next to us in our neighborhood are also homeowners that are going to take care of their property, that are going to take care of the neighborhood? You can make a strong argument that a homeowner may have more personal investment in his or her property than a renter, than a tenant for their home. Your thoughts on that topic?
Oh, in terms of just our desire for everyone to kind of have that sense of ownership and that responsibility for where they live.
Right.
No, I certainly see that, but when you bring up property values, as much as I think we all want to be able to have that equity in our homes, like there also is a limit in terms of how much taxes anyone can really endure. And that's where it's difficult, because clearly there are some folks that can handle that more, but we aren't in a place where we can have a progressive tax base. And so how do we then address that? So as these values are rising, that we're not then alienating the people that we want to keep here the most. And then again, those are those people who have spent their entire lives here, or certainly not our minority population. If we certainly want to maintain the diversity of Charlottesville, how do we kind of help support those who need it most? And I think that remains to be seen how we do that effectively, because my concern is, as you mentioned, your friend, he's renting from someone. It's not that if we say that, oh, everyone who has an income of less than X, we're going to actually provide this additional support for your taxes. Well, it doesn't matter for your friend, because the person who owns that property, I guarantee, has an income greater than X.
Oh, totally.
And they're just going to pass it down. We don't have control how they pass that on. And so we're going to have to get really creative around how we work through this, and how do we subsidize those who need it the most, while also recognizing that there are places where we can draw additional tax dollars. But there are limits to even what we can do, and therefore supply is a component as well.
She's basically saying, guys, with the increase in taxes, the landlords are going to pass these taxes down to the tenants. It's going to happen. So really the folks that are really getting hit hardest here are the folks that are not the homeowners, or the folks that are not working the high-wage jobs, because the landlords are passing this down to them.
And even though there are going to be people who are lower wage, who are lower income, but that do own homes, but we actually can help that. There are supplemental programs we can do that are targeted to those homeowners, but it's impossible to do that for those who are renting, which, as you've mentioned, your friend, for example, and that's true of so many people throughout the community. We don't have control of what those landlords are going to do in terms of how they pass on that additional tax.
Right. Heather Hill is killing it, guys, here on the I Love CVille show. Thank you for joining us. We're already past the halfway point, so I told you it was going fast here. A couple questions I want to throw to you here. The mediation session, is that fair to say, in December with the city councilors? How would I quantify this?
The retreat.
The retreat? Is retreat a better word?
Well,
okay. Whatever it is.
No,
it's like a talk session.
It was an opportunity for us to, cover a lot of ground.
What happened? Why was it needed? Did it provide value?
I honestly think it did, and I think what was the frustrating part for me is we just, there was no way for us to not do that in a not public setting just because of our rules. I would have loved, and I asked afterwards, like, we proactively reached out to those couple of news outlets that were there and just said, you know what, we just need this time. This is not about policy. This is about us just really kind of hearing from each other and from a different way. And I think it could have been more effective if we had just that one more layer, because there were things that I just wasn't comfortable sharing personally that I trust my colleagues and the staff that were there to do.
But not somebody live tweeting.
Correct.
Yeah, and that was going on.
No, and I really struggle with the live tweeting because I'll call out, like, CVille Weekly took it a step further, and I plan to discuss this with them. They actually took those tweets and made them an article. So they didn't even send their own person there to look firsthand. And I believe if you're a human being that was in that room, you knew that was emotional for almost all of us that were part of this conversation. And I just really struggle with how it then gets reflected, and people just, there's still like a missing of a human element. If you walked out of that room and didn't recognize that we're all human and that we all bring strengths to this table, but we do have different ways. And what I say again and again is, I believe that among council, we have a lot of similar goals. I'm not saying all, but a lot of very similar goals. If you were to say the top 10 things we care about, we probably agree on like 7. But the manner in which we go about doing them is very different. And I think that's where we've kind of had to take this opportunity to kind of, first we had to get to know each other a little bit through those last several months. And obviously we've been through some churn, and we're not denying that. Everyone knows we have. But to kind of have an opportunity to kind of come together and address some of those things head on, I think was productive. It could have been so much more productive if there really was nobody else in the room besides those, just a couple of news folks and then one, social, and just person who's there from social media, just tweeting, not on anyone's, dollars, I guess, just doing it just for their own personal interest. And that's fine. Anyone is welcome. But it just made it a very challenging conversation to have because...
Took away the safety.
Yeah, because you are. And even the moderator at the beginning was like, can we all agree to confidentiality? We're like, you don't really get how this works. Like, no. And I think he was hoping that we could kind of just reach out to the media. And I think that there are ways that you could have covered that day in a way that really was a little bit more, just still didn't expose just things that I just think aren't as productive. I mean, in terms of we just had some things we certainly needed to work through. I personally think that we made progress there. I think we all have a different lens and understand each other's lenses a little more clearly, that I'm hopeful it's going to take us in a more productive place in 2019.
I hope so too. I think we all do. What's it like working with your city councilors? What's it like working with Councilor Galvin, Councilor Bellamy, Mayor Walker, Councilor Signer? Put that in perspective.
I believe everyone brings strengths and perspectives to the table that certainly I've learned from every one of them in different ways. And so I just think for me, it's about how do we find that common ground and to work for. And so obviously some I knew before I became on council, and some I met while I was running, and then the mayor and I didn't really know each other at all until after the election, aside from just any interactions we had, just brief ones during the campaign. But I've really wanted to develop a relationship with every colleague that I have and try to keep all of our lines of communication open and just try to bring us together, because ultimately we need to function as a unit in order to best serve this community. And for me, that's a priority. And so whatever role that I can play in doing that is certainly a commitment that I've made and have continued to try to push forward on.
Are you able to connect on a personal level, or when you're interacting with your fellow councilors, is it strictly professional?
No, I believe there's a lot of personal connections that come through these relationships. Again, I knew some before, and the mayor and I certainly have connected in a number of ways, just because obviously we're both new to this, and so we kind of had
new and female. Yeah.
But we certainly are coming from a very different perspectives. But I think we both really have the city at heart. We may have different ways again about going about it, but I just think that this is a place that a place we care about, and that is our home, and we're raising children here. And so, finding that, again, it's always important just to find that common ground and And so as much as, I can try to find that both on a personal level, but at the end of the day, like the professional piece is what we have to, in order to get the work done in the community. But I do think it's important, the piece about our session together, it was some of those more personal anecdotes that really kind of shed some light for all of us on each other in a way that, maybe I had some more benefit of those stories before that session than others did, but I think that's when I started to kind of just see just some light bulbs of like, once you kind of get beyond this facade that we all think we have and that we carry, and get to that more personal level, it can allow you that. But it doesn't mean we have to be friends, and nor should we be friends necessarily. I mean, but we do have to be to a point where we can respect each other.
Yeah, everybody's got to play nice in the sandbox.
And work well and effectively.
Right. Heather Hill, our guest, let me throw this to you. One of your counselors, Dr. Bellamy, would like to rebrand Preston Avenue. And I have heard this topic from so many folks that follow I Love CVille. They're like, what's going on here? And, let me get some things off my chest, and then I'll get your thoughts. Some of the folks were like, well, this is our home. Preston Avenue is our home. This is our address. What do you mean you're going to change our address, right? Other folks have said to me, well, if you rebrand and you change Preston Avenue, does that not open up a Pandora's box to then changing and rebranding everything in the city? Does that mean we would try to eradicate Thomas Jefferson from the University of Virginia? Thomas Jefferson, guys, owned slaves. He did. That's well documented. He had a relationship with one of his slaves. That's well documented. So I guess where folks are going with this is, if you start at Preston Avenue, where does it stop? Where does it end? Does it include UVA and Thomas Jefferson? We'll start open-ended with you on that topic.
Well, or I go back to this as kind of what I did during the campaign, when obviously that time there was other topics of interest, is I would like to understand where the community stands on this. Prior to this coming up, it wasn't something I had heard about before. At the same time, I do think it's important that we educate our community on some of the sources, on some of these names, and I think there's a lot that can be learned from that. But for me, it's about what am I hearing as a priority for the community? Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that I think are going to help us really move the needle on equity. And as much as many things are a priority, we have to be able to just kind of decide what is a priority today versus, what are some things that are just ultimately going to have to kind of hold off, and what is important to this community. And I think in this case, it's what's important even to our minority community. Is this a concern that's driving them? And right now, that hasn't been something that I've heard. I'm really focused on, like, how do we help support our school system? Because obviously we have some equity issues that we're trying to address
New York Times article.
Of course. And so, I just see there's some other things that are really going to move the needle more tangibly for the people who live here. And that's where I want to focus my time and energy, because we don't have endless amounts of resources, whether they're dollars or staff time. And in the case of this, I think that this is something that our Blue Ribbon Commission, when they were engaged by the last council, did look at this. And so I've actually asked one of my colleagues, I think we should go back to that research and what it found, and I think there are certainly some hurdles with just simply, we just can't simply change names, right. And we certainly have heard from constituents ourselves, and I just think it's important that we have kind of a broad picture about what this looks like before we make any decisions, but most importantly, I just think it's important to hear from Charlottesville. Like, is this where we want to be spending our time and our resources? At the same time, recognizing that those are not people that we want to elevate, but let's educate about those people in the history in this community.
This might be the toughest question I ask here. A lot of folks have said that this could be a topic that's being manipulated for personal gain from Councilman Bellamy, to further his profile as a counselor. I certainly hope that's not the case. I really, truly, and I don't know. I've invited Dr. Bellamy on the show many times.
I was going to say you have to ask Dr. Bellamy. I don't know either.
I will ask him here. I truly hope that's the case, not the case. Where I'm going with this is I would like to keep moving forward and upward with the city. I would like to continue doing what's best for Charlottesville and continue Charlottesville heading in the right direction, in a positive direction. And I'm not sure that is like the right topic to do it with.
And I also want us to move positively, and I think we can do that by still having these difficult conversations around names and around the history of this community, but in a way that is positive and bring people together and educating the community, but also recognizing we have a lot of needs in this community, especially those for our low wealth and our minority communities that need to be addressed, and that's where I personally just want to spend my time and my energy, but at the same time, I am open. Like, if this is something that is really passionate for people, yes. Right. And that's the whole thing from the get-go, from my campaign. It's just, I want to be one that's responsive to the community. But what's troublesome, though, is we have to be careful, like, that we just can't allow there to be pockets of people, maybe they're on social media, that are just saying that this is their top thing or this other thing is their top thing. we have to be able to have a broad representation, and it gets back to our council chambers and why it's not an environment where a lot of people, even in our minority community, don't want to come and express themselves because people don't see it as an inviting environment. And so that's a problem when we're not getting a good representation from our community.
How do you fix council chambers? I mean, because, I've been occasionally, or I'll watch on the public television channel. I mean, it's screaming and yelling and talking over people. And when people are trying to make a point at the podium, other folks in the audience are yelling and knocking what they're trying to say. How do we even fix this?
Well, I think it's ebbed and flowed over the last year. And obviously it comes in waves as some topics come up. But I do think what's been most effective is when some folks have recognized that there are their own peers that are not able to be heard and they are hearing from each other. So for me, it's really about the community talking to itself and to each other. Because as much as we all can say, you know what, there's a lot of people just being alienated by the environment we've created. They don't want to be here. Our law enforcement officers, they don't want to be in the room either. I mean, it's really just become an environment that's not that welcoming. But I think that as a council, we kind of hit a point at some point a few months ago where it got to a point where I think we all just agreed we need to be able to kind of move through these meetings and get to the business at hand, but allow for the voices to be heard and to make sure that a variety can come to the table and participate effectively. And so as a result, I think that the mayor has taken some steps to do that, recognizing that is helpful in us kind of moving through, and also we need to stick up for each other. And that's actually something that came up during our session, is that we're in an environment where we're all being attacked personally, and how do we?
I feel for you guys.
But I think that we all share in that pain. We've all at one point been on the receiving end of it. How do we support each other? Even if we don't agree with each other all the time, how do we support each other and how do we support our staff? Because there is that handful of us that are up there. And granted, we did sign up for this. I mean, we're elected officials, and there's a point that I'm willing to endure, but there have been times where our staff has been ridiculed to the point where it's just that's not that they signed up for when they took a job with the city of Charlottesville. And we'll continue to have attrition and well beyond one area of our staff if we don't take care of these things and show and ask for the proper respect. And that is the word I think is so important. Everyone wants to be respected.
Yeah. And whether or not you agree or disagree with the counselors, I really hope that you realize that these folks are us, and they're working full-time jobs for $18,000 or $20,000. So I have tremendous respect for you. Even if we disagree on something, I understand that you are away from your family. Some of these meetings are lasting till 1:30 in the morning on Monday night, and you have 3 young kids. I mean, I have a 9-month-old, and I'm missing him crawling because I'm at work 70 hours a week. So I truly, truly, truly understand where you're coming from. Literally 5 days ago, my son crawled for the first time, and I'm here on Saturday working to pay the bills. And it was a pain that I was disappointed in myself. And where I'm going with this is I feel for you. And I feel for you. A couple other topics I want to get to, and then the New Hill Development Corporation. The Star Hill neighborhood is an important neighborhood in Charlottesville, an African-American community, an African-American based neighborhood. Yolanda Harrell, the CEO of the New Hill Development Corporation. You guys allocate...
Have you had her on here?
I'm going to.
Okay.
I would like to. $500,000. A lot of money.
Right, and that was from a couple of different priorities, but part of it was for their small area plan of sorts.
Talk to me about what council saw with the New Hill Development Corporation.
So for me, honestly, this was one opportunity, first and foremost. 2 council colleagues really were heavily involved, Councilor Galvin and Councilor Bellamy, and they did a lot of work in this, and I certainly, when those opportunities come up to support my colleagues, if I see a lot of work has been done, and I certainly wanted to support their efforts. That obviously isn't where I just draw the line. And then beyond that, I had a lot of questions going into that vote and can understand some of the concerns. But I really saw it as an opportunity to leverage some outside of our area resources I realize it seems like a lot, but I feel like once we invite some of those national players to the table, I really think it can make a huge impact on our community well beyond the dollars that we are allocating. And I think that the university's involvement in some of the relationships that they share with those groups, and for me, that was just it. It was like, we are really opening the door to some great opportunities. For everything that we look at the redevelopment of public housing, all of these things, I try to find what are ways that we can leverage an amount of city money to then invite more resources to the table, because none of this are we going to solve on our own.
Right.
And so this is just one example where I just saw an opportunity for us to leverage this. It was being led by, obviously African-American entrepreneurs in our community. They have, an engagement plan. And I did push back because it was clear that there wasn't a lot of proactive engagement. But
that's the trepidation I have.
Sure.
Okay.
But the issue is, I think that there's a concern that they didn't want to let down the community and say that, well, we're going to do this great thing, and then council doesn't even approve it, and then it's one more letdown for the minority community, where they just wanted to know they had all their ducks in a row and they had the resources behind it, so then they could do the robust engagement, because no plans have been made. But it's another area of our community. And my other pushback for me as a person who kind of looks at the development cycle is, well, what control are we going to have over these private developers? Like the person who owns this pretty awesome piece of property, like what are we going to be able to do to drive them there? But the bottom line is, if we don't have a vision for where that's going to go, we're never going to kind of see it to fruition. So we have to have the vision then to implement the zoning that then kind of puts us in that direction. And so for me, it was really an opportunity for, again, to leverage other resources as well as to kind of create that vision and in partnership with our minority community.
The conversation that I hear, and like you, I try to keep my pulse on the community as well. The conversation I hear is $500,000 is a lot of taxpayer money for an organization that at the time didn't have a definitive plan in place for its allocation of the money.
Right, and we did, we got, I think, more of a budget than maybe was even presented during our meeting, but the portion, I think it was 300 and some, I can't remember the exact number, that was allocated for the small area plan is going to be done by a group of people, an organization that has done this nationally, and I think we can use that to the benefit of other neighborhoods that are looking to do that. I know that Fifeville has also reached out to understand how can we leverage some of this expertise as we're coming in, because we've hit our own hurdles with the plans that we have for our community. And so again, for me, it's really an opportunity to tap resources, because it's the partners that they're looking to kind of bring to the table that I think is a big benefit to our community longer term.
And I think anything that we can do in the Star Hill neighborhood and the Fifeville neighborhood to help these neighborhoods maintain their sense of identity and their sense of authenticity, I think will go a long way with the communities in these neighborhoods embracing the ideas that we have. I think that's really important. And as she has very well put, we need to listen to the folks in the neighborhood to help figure out the vision for the neighborhood. Changing gears, another topic I want to hit that's, I think, very prevalent in the news cycle, and you've already filled 3/4 of the program, so you're doing a great job. Let's see, the Charlottesville Albemarle Convention and Visitors Bureau. Okay, Adam Healy, the interim executive director. The advertising agency Clean from Raleigh, North Carolina, your old stopping grounds, Raleigh, North Carolina.
I lived in Raleigh for a period of time, yes.
Yeah. They're trying to help rebrand or change the conversation of Charlottesville from a national standpoint. Let's start open-ended here. Your thoughts on the CACVB, Adam Healy, and the Clean advertising agency?
Well, obviously we're going through a lot of transition there with an interim, and also just with some of our electeds now being part of that board. And so I haven't been as intricately involved as some of my colleagues because they are actually sitting on that board. But I will say that what I have seen of some of the earlier
artwork
campaign piece, I'm concerned. I feel like it was out of touch with everything that we've just gone through as a community. And
can I say it? Can I? I know.
Go ahead.
I'll say it. The artwork I'm seeing from Clean, the advertising agency from North Carolina, showed all white people drinking wine. And I forget what the tagline was. Yeah,
yes.
The terminology was, and I think I posted it here. In fact, I did post it. The tagline was, welcome civilization, welcome spitting in the right context. And I just saw this, and I'm like, these dudes have no idea what is going on in Charlottesville right now.
Right, and I think it's so easy to sit so far away from here and kind of look in and
be like a Monday morning quarterback.
I can go do this. Right. But at this point, you have actually the benefit of Monday morning quarterbacking. You have that benefit to you. Have you not seen what this community has gone through over the last year and a half, 2 years?
Seriously.
And yet, this is the direction we feel like it's time to go. And I was just kind of taken aback.
I was floored.
Yes. So I agree with you.
And this is someone who does it for a living. And then, Andre Xavier, who we polled here, he's a big tourism guy. And Andre Xavier's watching now. He came up with this great point in the comments of when I was telling folks that you were coming on the show. He thinks that we should open source it for folks in Charlottesville. We have this huge budget that we're allocating to an out-of-city advertising agency when we could take a fraction of that, and call it a prize.
No, and
see,
can
give
go
us
viral.
the best artwork. And it'll go viral.
And we
exactly.
certainly have a lot of creative people within
Yeah,
this community, and
right.
I think that could be, I think that's a very interesting take. And again, this is way outside of our, I mean, I guess there's representation from my group that weighs in on how they spend their dollars, but for me, it's really has come down to that campaign was not resonating with me, and I think it was not resonating with a lot of people. And it's just really surprising that that's where we came to, given where we are. And it's also, I'm biased though, because I just feel like I have a very different lens of this community than I did a couple of years ago, given what we've been through and just being so close to it. That it certainly has altered my perspective in a number of ways, and I'm glad for that. I feel like I've definitely grown as a person as a result of all his experiences. But I think it's really short-sighted to even from the outside, even if you're looking at it nationally. And I'm just trying to understand like what time that they've spent here and who have they communicated with, just to understand that thinking that was the right way to go.
As someone who is a leader in our community, which you are, as someone who has a branding background, which you do, I think you have tremendous perspective to offer here. I mean, from my standpoint, Heather, and I'm curious of your thoughts, this campaign that dictates the national conversation and the national perception of Charlottesville, Virginia, is a huge priority for the city of Charlottesville. I would say like top 3 or 4 priorities here. What are your thoughts here?
No, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that the message I'm not saying that we're there yet. The message that I hope that we can have and the branding that we have later is that we are a unified community. And we're ones that share an interest in having a diverse community that comes together and can, have the resilience following all the events that have happened, but we are going to come together. And I just feel like this is so one note in the direction that it's gone that I just think it's taken away from just the community that we know that we have. Because if, with all the negatives that have happened in the last 18 months, I really just see this as a community that people have just certainly stepped up and want to give of themselves and their talents in a multitude of ways to help make this a better community for all of us. And I think those are the kind of messages that we should be sending.
That was fire right there. Let's turn that entire segment, Judah, into a sizzle reel right there, talking about the advertising campaign nationally for the city of Charlottesville. I mean, how do you change the conversation? What do you do? What is the conversation or the brand of Charlottesville in your perspective? That might be the toughest one right there.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'll be honest. I think when someone else that you've interviewed, I watched Councilor Galvin's and talks about just coming here. I'll be honest, Charlottesville was not a place that I felt comfortable as home when I first was here.
How long did it take?
A while. So I moved here in 2003. I worked here for 2 years. I went to business school, and then I told you I left. And then at the time, my then fiance and we'd been dating the whole time. We decided this was going to be the place versus Minneapolis for a multitude of reasons. And
Charlottesville versus Minneapolis.
Yes.
Wow.
So I came back here, and I still was kind of feeling that way. And then we started to raise our family here and really make more of those personal connections, because so many transitions had happened in my life here that it was hard to kind of, going to business school here is a very different world than working here locally. And so I'd gone through that transition already. But to me, Charlottesville still wasn't home. Like something wasn't clicking. There was something about, like, I don't know, this vibe that I was feeling that wasn't really just kind of homing in on me. And it wasn't until like really just when I had kids and started to make those real personal connections and get involved in the community at a deeper level that this place really became my home. And I'm just being honest. So it took me...
My wife feels the same way.
A while, yeah.
She is, and she's watching now. I said, wants to make friends, to struggle to make friends. She's come from Wall Street in New York City to here in Charlottesville 4 years ago. We just had a son. So she's going through all these different transitions of her life where she has struggled to find friends. And it's a lot of what you're saying.
Sure, and I've always, certainly in all these areas, I've always had this pocket of friends, but it really did not feel like home until really getting involved in that layer again. Like I said at the very beginning, it's like everywhere I've gone where there's been a level of discomfort with where I've lived and me not really kind of resonating because it's never been like just the home I grew up with. Now I'm at a point where, yes, this is more like home than anything else. And a little personal, I went through something that was really personally difficult a few years ago. And when I think about it, I'm just like, when that all went through that, I thought to myself, would I have rather been back up in New York when this happened? Or would I rather been here? And this was honestly the only place on this earth that I realized was going to provide the support system for me through that difficult time. And it was, and it delivered in so many ways. And it honestly was that moment that I was like, we're never leaving here. This community has given so much more to me than I ever even gave it credit for. And it really kind of emboldened me to even be thinking about what other ways can I really get involved. And here I am now in this capacity. But it did take that kind of crisis and just seeing how a community, some people I didn't even know, but they knew that I was going through something that either they knew or they had a friend that had gone through something similar, could just get behind me and support me and just come out of the woodwork. And it felt so engulfed with that love. And it just is really resonating this day. And then from here, the ball has just rolled. And like I said,
and now you're a Charlottesville City Councilor.
Yeah, and the campaign, it was just so energizing in that way, the campaigning part of it. As much as what I say to people, like, do you regret doing this? Like, no, like every day I still get up energized because there's enough that lifts me up.
I was going to ask you that.
That overbalances the things that bring me down. And don't think things don't bring me down. It was rough this summer. Like there was mornings I was throwing up. Like just like the anxiety just gets to you, and you take some of these things personally. But then you have to be able to kind of. I've gotten so much better now of just being able to compartmentalize that and realize where the noise is, and then just try to focus. And I really thank all the constituents out there who provide support and do say things that are encouraging and stop me on the street. And it certainly helps. But just to hear from people. The positive is great. So if there's positive to be shared, we appreciate it.
I think that was a great answer. And I think, with the campaign, and before I change gears here, and you filled an hour, so we're almost done here.
Okay.
You've crushed it here. But before we change gears here, I think with the campaign for Charlottesville, I think we just need to acknowledge the history. Mm-hmm. I think we need to acknowledge what happened on 8/12/2017. We cannot hide from it. Changing the moniker from civilization away from Charlottesville, so people don't type in Charlottesville, VA in Google, is not the approach to advertising. Right. We need to say, this is what went wrong, this is what happened, we understand this is bad, but these are the changes we're going to make it better.
And I believe it will happen organically.
Because
I believe we have this community will get behind that and wants to work together broadly. And so I'm optimistic. I remain optimistic.
Me too. Yeah, I think we are both glasses half full type of people. And I think Charlottesville, if the CVB, I think I got that moniker right, if they consider Andre Xavier's idea of crowdsourcing a campaign and getting the creative people in this community giving their best ideas for a prize that's at a fraction of the cost of the contract to this agency in Raleigh, I think we would get an abundance of ideas. Where right now what we have is we have a firm that doesn't live in Charlottesville trying to tell us what Charlottesville's supposed to look like. And to me, that is like the definition of backwards. I mean, that's how I feel. One more topic, two more questions for you, and then I want to ask you this question. I close the show the same way every time. Is Charlottesville, Virginia, a better place today than when you first arrived? I'm going to get your thoughts on that.
But not yet.
Not yet. Before we do that, I got a lot of questions here from people. One of the questions is about the West Main Street streetscape. This is from a gentleman on Twitter. $4 million the city's putting into...
Matthew?
How did you know?
I know.
He speaks very highly of you. He said that when he responds to you, emails you a question, you are so quick.
What's so funny? Poor Matthew.
Gillikin.
Yes, Matthew. Yeah. I know, but I know I owe him a response from right before the holidays about us getting together for our next coffee. But it's in the back of my head, Matthew. I did not forget.
And he watches.
And unfortunately, these last 2 weeks have been intense with children home and the holidays, and emails still kind of coming inbound. But I have not forgotten. And Matthew did send us a very thoughtful email asking about this question. And I think, there is. This is another example, though, where we are trying to leverage city dollars to invite more dollars from both the state and the universities. Also, kind of is definitely committed and player in this as well. And as we look at, that's a really critical component of our corridor in terms of the multimodal use that we all want to promote. Mm-hmm. And right now, I would not ride my bike down there if you paid me.
You're saying it's unsafe?
I don't find it's safe. I think there's so much confusion in terms of cars, and obviously with these scooters that are now being that are being piloted. But until we have really the infrastructure to support it, and he raised a point in a question to us around just the undergrounding of the infrastructure. I'll be honest, I was shocked at the dollar amounts that go into that. And I'm certainly interested in ways, or are there ways that we can make those dollars more efficient? But I do feel that this is a real opportunity for the city to leverage. It is still a significant amount of money, but it does invite a lot of investment from outside of our own budget in order to make this happen. And I think it really is kind of the center of the community, and it's really how we're going to create that connectivity. I think we have to have more of an emotional and physical connection with the university so that we all can recognize that we are all need to be more in a symbiotic relationship here. But I certainly hear the concerns around the price tag that goes with these things. I think with most of our infrastructure projects, it's been pretty shocking how much, as much as we estimate every year that we wait on these things, those dollar amounts only get more. And this is a project that's been out there for a decade. And so when it comes to fruition, it's only going to be greater. And the Belmont Bridge is another example. Yep. But I do believe that we need to be investing generally in our infrastructure because it serves all the needs of our community. And I'm also a believer that if we don't maintain our assets, that they're only going to be a greater cost for us long term. And I think West Main has just not been given any attention for so long. It's at this point, it's in a state of disrepair. And it's another place where we want to kind of create that vision. But we also need to be looking at how do we make that corridor and the downtown area more inviting for everyone who lives here.
One of my topics. It was an interesting study. I think the number was 42% of minorities do not feel welcome on the Charlottesville downtown mall.
And
that startled me.
And we have to understand why, because let's be honest, in Fridays after 5, those are free. And we've talked about what are some groups that we can bring there that are going to maybe encourage a different, segment of our population to coming there when that's free, and you can bring your own food if you want. What is it? And we have.
Well, why do you think it is? Why? I mean, is it the price? Catherine Matthews, the owner of Iron Poffles and Coffee, she's an entrepreneur. She came on the show and she brought this point up. She said, "I didn't feel welcome on the downtown mall. When I came to Charlottesville, I didn't have a lot of money, and all the restaurants downtown are high price point restaurants for the most part." She said that she didn't see a lot of diversity when she came downtown. You brought up Fridays after 5. When you go to Fridays after 5, it is like 25 to like 60-year-old white people at Fridays after 5. I mean, that's safe to say. I'm just calling what I see.
Sure. And I'm not disagreeing, because I'm saying that should be an example of where everyone should feel welcome and coming. Yes.
Yeah. So talk to me about this here. She makes the point about the restaurants being too expensive. She makes the points of not feeling included when you come downtown. Your thoughts?
No, I think there are certainly components of that, and I think we all want to have more diversity in terms of the people who own those businesses, and how do we invite that diversity to come in. And so people, I think it's a domino effect again. If you're turned off, and once you've anytime a first impression is made, as when you're dating someone, once you kind of lose that first impression, people maybe not are going to come back. So what do we do to really kind of invigorate that? What's amazing to me though is when we have these Halloween events that city sponsors and some of these other even with the tree lighting that happened recently, it's a very diverse crowd.
Right.
And it's just so exciting to see that energy. And so how can we replicate that kind of energy? And I know that the downtown businesses have tried to do some things in terms of just more of these sidewalk type opportunities where it's out and about and it's not a huge price point for things and it's just bringing people together.
Approachable.
Right. Yeah. Very approachable. So I just think that, I'm certainly in support of partnering with them to understand what are ways that we can replicate that environment that we see, again, during that Halloween time and during our tree lighting, where there is a very diverse portion of the population. And same with they did the parade for the holiday or whatever they called. I don't know if they called it a holiday, but it was very general. But you see a much different group of folks for those events than you might see on a Friday evening. And why is that? And what can we do to kind of create that energy around that? How do we get Fridays after 5 to expand in a way that we're welcoming many more people? And I think it starts, just with some of the choices that are made in terms of what is the music that's being selected, and what are ways that we can then advertise that to targeted
I love
groups.
your idea of bringing the food piece.
Yeah.
Like bringing your food to the event. Now, there may be some resistance that you guys are going to encounter if you pitch this idea.
We can bring food to Fridays after 5. Yeah. I mean, there's no one stopping you from bringing
really?
stuff in.
I didn't know that.
Oh, no, yeah. I pack a bag with
for
my
your
kids.
Family.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I don't understand.
That should be marketed.
Why is this a problem when there really truly is a free event where you can bring anything that you want yourself? I mean, some people go on the mall and get the food, but I mean, I've definitely brought leftovers from, in a bag to
As someone who has a 9-month-old, I now realize how important that is.
You always have to have food on you.
Oh my gosh.
And diapers.
Yeah, and the wipes.
Yeah.
And the wipes.
So I'm with you, and I am committed to trying to work with the downtown businesses and also some of our leaders from our minority community. What are some of these barriers, and how do we create that shift? Because I want all these places, especially as we are investing heavily, and that's what started this whole conversation in the West Main, to be welcoming to everyone. And how do we tell the story of our community's history so that people can learn and feel a part of it?
I feel like I have so much left, and I'm so grateful for your time. I know you're running out of time here, so I got 3 more questions.
We have a council meeting tonight.
I know you do. You have a lot to prepare for here. Your thoughts on the Woodard project, $80 million project on Water Street we lost. I mean, that was a huge project. Would have created a lot of jobs. Keith had, and I know him, $1.2 million of his money already invested, and he chose, I'm just going to walk away from $1.2 million.
This is something actually Matthew and I did talk about, and others I've talked. I mean, so this is one of my earlier things I had to evaluate coming in, and the first vote, there was a lot of support for that project going in with the prior council, and we came in at a point in time, and my first vote was not in favor for a litany of reasons. And my biggest thing was I just felt like the balance of we're trying to address a lot of needs with a pretty small piece and a very important piece of our community, in terms of just the value, not just the dollar value, but just that piece of property. And I just struggled with how how we were really limiting the market, which was ultimately the reason why it was having to be designed in that way. And as a result, it was going up and it was going out, and
more floors.
Right. What are we doing? And a lot of it changed over the course of that time. So the project that was presented when it was first put in front of council, when it won that kind of competition piece, was very different. So after that first vote, obviously there was a lot of churn around that. And so there was a commitment on the part of the developer to really work with the market vendors and really try to find a path forward. And I was feeling very encouraged by that collaboration that was taking place, and ultimately did end up voting for it when it was coming back to be discussed. Still very difficult. Like, I would feel like I was weighing a lot of things, but at the end of the day, like, I also struggled that development was challenging financially. So it was challenging.
What do you mean by that?
In terms of making it work financially. And so obviously I think the city does have a piece of ownership in terms of how long it took to get through that. And
over 2 years.
And I've offered Mr. Woodard, like, if you want to download with me, I know other councilors have asked too, I would love to kind of hear some of those hurdles so that we can try to help this not be a hurdle in the future. Like, what are some of the problems where the city got in the way of this progress? At the same time, you're also trying to balance the needs of a board of architectural review, a planning commission, a city council. And then we found, in this case, there was competing priorities. So as much as the market needed to have this open space, the board of architectural review wanted there to be trellises and trees, which are all wonderful, but then you've lost these spaces, and now the market's no longer feasible. So I think what happened is, over time, these groups can't even align on what their priorities are, which is frustrating. And I get that. But I do think that comes along with a project that was trying to do so much in such a small space. And it was always a challenge for me, and I think it's a challenge. It was going to be a challenge for that developer, whether it went through even a little more smoothly or not, in terms of the finances. And that's not for me to get involved in, but it's just when you're looking at trying to do all of that in that spot, and the name Water Street is Water Street for a reason. There's water under there. There's a lot of unknowns. And so as we talk about just exploding construction costs, I do struggle to know that, was it really a feasible project? And I don't know the answer, but just all the ins and outs that I kind of observed and see, it was obviously tight. And that's kind of why we ended up where we did. Ultimately, council did approve it. I didn't approve it with a ton of enthusiasm, because I was concerned mostly that it wasn't going to achieve what it set out to achieve.
Good answer.
Yeah.
That was honest.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
It is honest. And I just also feel like
appreciate you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I'll leave that one at there. I'm sure it'll cause enough churn as it is.
Second to last one.
Oh my gosh, you're killing me.
Landmark Hotel.
Yeah. The Landmark is one.
Help us. What do we do?
I struggle. I'm one that was frustrated that we just didn't follow through on our commitment with that incentive. And I call it an incentive because it wasn't that the city was going to be allocating funds. But when you look at the dollars and cents, the amount of income it would have generated for this community over time, like 6 times the amount of incentive we were offering. And so I just struggle that I am not a fan of necessarily that developer. I'm not excited that that's where we are. But this is the cards we've been dealt, and we don't have a lot of research was done. Obviously, one of my colleagues, it was like their mission, when they came onto council.
Councilor Singler.
To do
that was his whole platform.
And trust me, like, a lot has been evaluated to try to understand where we stand legally. We've asked our new city attorney to look at it again.
But condemning the property?
Yes. What can you do to actually drive change? At the end of the day, we still have to buy the property. And I hear people like, they want to make it affordable housing. That is not a feasible. We've had affordable housing developers say that's just not a feasible alternative. And so I guess my frustration is that we got, this is before this current council sat, that we put ourselves in a position where we don't have any leverage. And so we're in this waiting game. Obviously, there are some concerns with safety that, maybe we certainly should revisit, as those have now, continued to be raised.
You saw the CVille Weekly article about the rats and all that on the downtown mall, which I'm sure you're a news junkie like I am.
Yeah, so we need to, are there ways that we can leverage that to drive the change? But at the end of the day, it still is going to need to be purchased. And so someone's going to have to step in and be willing to take it on. And obviously, that's how Dewberry got it, is that the first plan for this, the Landmark, truly fell apart before it got purchased by him. And
now the emperor of empty lots has it.
And I just struggle with this because one of the frustrations I have is that I understand people are coming from, and like, we don't want to be giving to this specific developer and giving him an incentive. But at the end of the day, when we see that on the long run, the benefit that it'll provide to the community and the dollars it will bring in, because I don't think that a lot of folks really kind of connect those dots. It's very frustrating. I've talked to our economic development office about this. I've talked to the Chamber of Commerce. How do we create, and you're a branding guy, this is great. How do we create some visuals that can simply, to the layperson, explain how economic development drives us to have the funding we need to prioritize the things we care about most?
I think you got to do the flip book. Like when we were kids, and you would be able to do that flip book and flip the pages, and you could see the stick man go from start to finish. I think we need to do a very clear before and after marketing campaign. And the fact that you just said that the investment, and I'm paraphrasing here, and if I'm saying it wrong, please correct me, that the investment that the city was going to give into this with this developer.
It wasn't even an investment. It was just kind of giving him a relief. We weren't even going to take any dollars.
Would have created 6 times a return. I mean, that right there is the campaign, right?
And I understand how people don't, I mean, I'm not excited this is the partner we have either. But that's not the point.
Right. This is what we have.
This is what we have,
right.
And it's going to translate into something that's going to allow us to then take those dollars and invest them in things that we really care about. And it's a real missed opportunity. And I know, and I could say the same about the Woodard. I agree with you. There's a lot of, and that was an argument. Like there's a lot of great tax dollars there. For that one, I had a harder time just seeing that was the right project for a city-owned property.
Sure.
Given that there's a lot of
Well, there was so
needs.
different though. The Woodard project was a project that was going to appeal to, again, I hate to say this, but white wealthy people. I mean, when it comes down to it, where the Landmark Hotel is something that is in our skyline.
Right, and it still does appeal to wealthy people because it's a luxury hotel, but it is certainly it's a very different.
Right, so different.
Yeah,
so
and right
different.
now it's a skeleton in the sky. I mean, and that is what it is. And unfortunately, I'm at a loss. And I mean, and I'm interested in bringing up and to see if there's any more energy around wanting to revisit this again. I just don't know what conversations have even happened with Mr. Dewberry to know. But
Our last question.
Okay.
Thank you, Heather. You did a great job, right?
We'll see.
You feeling good? You filled 60, 70 minutes. You're crushing it.
Okay, well.
The last question I have for you, and I'm very grateful for your time, is do you think it's better today, Charlottesville, Virginia? First when you first arrived. When was the year you first arrived? How long?
2003.
Okay. So
September.
15 years. You've seen a lot.
I do.
Is it better?
I think it's better. As I said, this is a place that when I first moved here, I did not feel comfortable with. I don't want to even, I'll say the word pretentious is a word that came to mind when I came here. I just didn't feel that warmth of a community, and it wasn't a place that I thought that I could be able to call home. And over the course of time, and quite frankly, even with our greatest crises that we've had over the last year and a half, I think it has brought this community together and energized in a way that I think, yes, we are certainly better as we move forward. We have a lot of work ahead of us. I'm not denying that. There's a lot of inequity that needs to be addressed, but I've certainly met a lot of great people that I'm excited to partner with on that effort throughout this community, and I feel like it's a better place than it was when I first moved here.
Excellent.
It's a place that I call home now, and I did not in 2003.
And a place I call home too, and I'm excited to raise my family in. And I thought you did a great job today. I'm truly, truly grateful for your time.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for listening.
I want to put in perspective here. I asked her to come on the show for Facebook message. She came on and said I'd be happy to. And I think that's a testament to her as a leader in this community, that she's willing to come on a forum and deal with tough questions and be honest. That's a sign of her character and who she is as a leader in Charlottesville. Tomorrow, another leader in Charlottesville on the show, Mayor Walker, is going to join us here on the I Love CVille show. Special time tomorrow, 2:30 p.m. start instead of our normal 12:30. This show is thanks to the fine people at Scott Wagner Chiropractic and Sports Medicine and Greenberry's Coffee, guys. We close the show the same way every time. Please, Charlottesville, please be good to each other. We'll see you in 26 hours right here on the I Love CVille show. Have a good day.